All right, so welcome to today's episode of Liberty on the Rocks. As always, I'm your host, William Gaston, and I'm joined by my co-host, Thomas Kilroy. And today, our guest is Vinny Marshall from Think Liberty. Vinny, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi. First of all, thanks for having me. Very excited to do this evening. Vinny Marshall. I am one of the founders of Think Liberty. I'm also kind of like a Liberty movement design and marketing and web gun for hire. You can often find me trolling around on Twitter, harassing Kamala Harris, or arguing with Kyle Wagner on Facebook, and anywhere in between.
Oh, Kyle. Well, hey, first of all, we just really appreciate you agreeing to come on the show, and I'm really excited about what you have to explain to us today. But first things first, the scotch of today's episode on my end is the Balvenie Doublewood, aged 12 years. Vinny, what are you sipping on?
Yeah, so I went out and actually got a scotch today. I won't pretend like I'm some fantastic connoisseur. I knew it was scotch, so I got some Monkey Shoulder Batch 27, smooth and rich, and it's delicious. I love it quite a bit, actually.
Outstanding. Man, we're learning all kinds of stuff already. Tom, what do you have over there?
I am making it simple and straightforward with some Jameson. So can't
always a good decision.
That's Sam Adams, but yes. Jameson.
I mean, was Sam Adams Irish? I don't know. Whatever. It's all the same thing.
Oh, no, it's not.
Well, that's that. This episode isn't about Sam Adams, to be fair. So it's not as if, right? He wasn't prepared to have to deal with such.
Yeah, I'm really overwhelmed here. Well, that's a good segue, Vinny. Why don't you tell us about who we will be talking about more accurately?
Sure. So you pitched this to me, and I couldn't have been more excited. I'm a giant fanboy, and when I got into Liberty, right? So a lot of people talk about who you found in Liberty, and a lot of times it's Gary Johnson or Ron Paul. And for me, it's our subject today, which was Friedrich August von Hayek, and he is a notable Austrian economist. Most people probably know him from the fact that he won a Nobel Prize. He was pretty famous for, duking it out with that Apple Keynes for quite a bit over economic theory. And he's brilliant, genius. I love his work.
Awesome. Okay, well, we're very excited about learning more about it. I'll be honest with you. I don't know a whole lot about Hayek in particular, and just the Austrian School of Economics in general. I'm familiar with Mises and a lot of the main theories, but this is all going to be new information, and I'm just really stoked. So why don't you give us a basic rundown of kind of who he was, his educational background, his main accomplishments, that kind of thing?
Sure. So Hayek was born and raised in Vienna. One of the schools out there is, I guess, at the time, it was one of the most prestigious economic schools in the world. So he went and he studied economics at an early age. He was also really interested in psychology and a lot of like social science kind of studies. So it's important to understand that when you're kind of looking at Hayek and the way that he thought, he started as a staunch socialist, just like pretty much anyone else from that time.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really interesting. He was a super, because that was hip, right? And he writes about it and he talks about it. That's what everyone did, and that's also what he did, right? And that's just it was the popular way of thinking. He talks about it like socialism was trendy, right? And he was just in for the trend. And he came into libertarianism by way of Ludwig von Mises in kind of an interesting way. A lot of people probably know that one of the books that Mises is most popular for writing was titled simply Socialism. And so Hayek picked up this book thinking that it was a book about socialism in a positive sense, as being a fan of socialism, right? And he's thinking, okay, cool, I'm going to get this book about socialism because I love socialism. And apparently the book blew his mind apart. And he ended up finding Mises, and, he became his protege.
That's crazy.
And yeah. And it's interesting because a lot of people oftentimes make it to be some kind of like philosopher Olympics. Like we have to pick one, and they'll say like, oh, Mises was better than Hayek because this reason, or Rothbard was better than Hayek because of this reason. When if you actually look at how things went, like Hayek was a humble student of Mises, and he's never been shy to heap praise on the person that opened his mind up to the concepts of a free market.
That's a pretty intense conversion.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of anything I might have missed. There's a bunch of stuff I'm sure we'll go over. But yeah, I think one of the key points in going into this is to understand that he did come from a socialist perspective, and that all kind of makes a lot of sense when you unpack a lot of his work.
So it's I guess you could say that even socialists can be saved. So that is fascinating. So you mentioned that he earned a Nobel Prize. What can you tell us about that?
Now, so I'm not as entirely familiar with the process that went on with it, and I know that it didn't happen. Right, and so he wrote The Road to Serfdom, which is his most popular work, around, I think, the 30s, and I don't believe he got the Nobel Peace Prize until sometime later. And it was largely his economic work. He is an incredible economist. The stuff that he went through was like really high level stuff, and we talked earlier, and you were mentioning we'll be going over definitions, which is important because a lot of his stuff is pretty intense. And so he came from a standpoint of really, really advanced economic education. And he applied it to a lot of the theories of Mises. And the way that he worked through his logic is, I believe, what led for him to receive the Nobel Prize. It's just, his work is just brilliant. It's something different. And I don't know. I think that the Nobel Prize in this day and age, the fact that Obama has one, really cheapens it.
Yeah.
But I think it still meant something.
But he
bombed a lot of people to earn that Nobel Peace Prize. Right?
Yikes.
A lot of people. And I mean, look, you have to take a lot of lives that you don't care about, to get to the level Obama did to get that. So I think the Nobel Peace Prize is cheapened in this day and age. But again, I think that when Hayek got it, it still actually meant something.
I mean, in Obama's defense, I can't tell the difference between an orphanage and a terrorist training camp from the drone feed either.
Sure. It's all monochrome, like,
Oh, geez. All right.
So I guess he got
buzz, and we're already getting dirty.
Hey, well, Obama's a piece of shit, right? He's FDR Jr., so we can say that. But so 1974 is when he got, and that's for Hayek, he died close to 100 in the early 90s. So 74, he was an older gentleman. Most of his work was behind him when he received, except for the Fatal Conceit. He actually did that one, I think, in the late 80s.
Okay. Well, let's go over some definitions. I almost got ahead of myself there, and I'm glad you caught me. Let's go over some definitions and some terminology, and then we'll just really dive into the meat and potatoes.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, okay, when you dissect Hayek's work, there's a couple things that you want to be familiar with. I'm sure you guys are both familiar with some semblance of the theory, like the time preference.
Explain. Let's assume we don't.
Sure. So it's time preference, and it's in a sense of like a high time preference and a low time preference, and it's like it pretty much compares what you think when you make decisions, right? And so if you have a high time preference, then that's going to be like you want it now. Right. And you're not worried about tomorrow. You're not worried about the day after tomorrow. You want it now. You have a high time preference. Your time means something to you. You're eager and you want instant gratification. A low time preference says that you value more than you value time. Right. And it's basically savings versus not, if you really want to boil it down. Right. So with the high time preference, you want it now. You'll pay high money for it. You're not thinking logically in a sense because your needs are winning over your logic, and sometimes that works out, and that's totally fine. I don't want to make it sound too negative. Sure. It's just a preference. And a low time preference is basically like what you think when you save, right? Like, I'm not going to get this thing right now. I'm going to get it later, right? And so, and watch, like someone's going to listen to it and be like, no, you were totally backwards with it. But that's essentially
whatever the actual definition is. It's either this way or the inverse. It's the opposite. So yeah, I try.
Right. Yeah, I'm drinking, you know. So it.
Oh yeah,
right, can we cuss? Can we do that? Okay. I'm sorry.
Now, gentlemen, it's all good.
Yeah, thank you. So I mentioned that to say, so there's something that I'm going to bring up. It's a term that can be a little confusing, intertemporal. And so intertemporal choices it's an economic term, and it pretty much deals with an individual's decisions that affect the options that become available in the future. And so when this is why I love Hayek, right? And so when you talk about something like market behavior and liberty being inseparable from responsibility, intertemporal choices become a really pivotal topic in economics. And we'll get into why later. But so that's that term is intertemporal. It's tied into time preference. So intertemporal choice is one that's a low time preference, is you're thinking more about your future than you are about right now. There's spontaneous order, which is a term that Hayek used tons and tons and tons. For anyone who's a little confused about how something can be spontaneous and still be in order, it's just basically, so when Keynes and Hayek had their big kerfuffles, there was top down versus bottom up, right? Keynes is top down, which is basically to say that we already have the solutions, we already have the goals, and we're going to direct you and the economy. We're going to centrally plan toward those goals. That's top down. Bottom up is a spontaneous order, which basically says we're going to lay a fundamental groundwork of rules and frameworks, and we'll let things go bottom up from there. So that is to say that the goal is progress. What that progress is has yet to be seen. And so that's what a spontaneous order means. I'm trying to think of anything else. It is worth noting, Hayek he pretty much created the price model theory. We can go into that later, and I'll explain it more, but I'll be talking a bunch about prices. And that's because he kind of hung his hat on the price theory. Another important one, praxeology. So if anyone isn't familiar with the Austrian school, Ludwig von Mises is the granddaddy of praxeology. He invented it, right? And that's basically saying that everyone the Keynesians and everything else, regular, your Krugermans, your normal economists, they look at stuff from a standpoint of investment as price times investment, and it all kind of equals out to output. And that was just this aggregate formula that they use, whereas Mises used praxeology, and it's a way of looking at human action and the way that humans interact with each other. It's very rooted in the law of supply and demand. Humans will generally do certain things in certain situations based on incentives, all that kind of stuff, right? And that's essentially the school of thought that converted. It was so strong and convincing, it converted Hayek to socialism, or from socialism.
Wow.
So praxeology, human action, is another important thing to define.
Well, and that is just fascinating to me that they took something that seems more benign and very logical, mathematical, like economics, and then they included not necessarily calculated or planned for, but they included the concept of human nature and the patterns that we see in human behavior. Because that's inescapable if you're going to take a realistic look at how economics works. You can't disregard that. So I think that's just, man, that's really that's intense. There's a lot of good stuff there.
Well, that's why I love the Austrian school in just overall, is because you go throughout life and all of these economic analyses and everything kind of work based around the fact that we're all just robots. And when a price goes to a certain level, we'll react a certain way. Right. And when this happens, this will happen. And praxeology and human action kind of leaves it more open to be like, no, you have it all wrong. We're not robots. right? The market is a very fluid thing that's always changing and always moving, and it accounts for everyone's feelings at all times. Which, blows the top off a lot of stuff. And one last thing, when we're going to talk about Hayek's work, I totally forgot to mention the term conceit. I feel like not a lot of people are totally familiar with it. And the term, he has a very popular work called The Fatal Conceit. And the term conceit basically means excessive pride in oneself.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Well, where do you want to start? Dealer's choice, sir.
Woo, boy. Sure. I'll start with the basics.
Okay.
So I think the basics for me would be Hayek and what sets him apart.
Okay.
So like I said, Hayek, so with Mises, if you read Human Action, it's a giant book. It's like, what Mises is known for. And it outlines his whole theory of praxeology and human action. And it's amazing. Anyone listening, go read it. It's really long. It's really verbose, but it's totally worth it. Right. But it's odd in the sense that he makes a lot of proclamations in the book about like, empirical analysis does not apply to human action and praxeology. Right. Historical analysis does not apply to human action and praxeology. And this is a part where Hayek and Mises didn't agree. And this is very important to point out. And so another term that we could define, I'm probably going to come up with a bunch more of these that I forgot to mention, is an axiom, right? An axiom is kind of like an anchor of thought that a system of belief is based off of. So the axiom of choice for Mises was praxeology, human action, and nothing, according to Mises, could really disprove it. And Hayek came along and he said, "You're right, but," right? And so for Hayek, he needed all of his logic to be wrapped up and to have it make complete and total sense to him in a logical standpoint. So he, instead of relying on praxeology, relied on the price model. Okay. And so I was just reading a biography on Hayek, and one of, I think, the most beautifully articulated things in it was how the author went to describe the way that Hayek viewed the market as a sense.
Okay.
And he basically said that, that imagine your sense of sight. And in a community, in a small community, your sense of sight is very important. It's going to tell you how other people feel, what other people are going through, what you should do, how you should act, is because your sense of sight, you can sense things, right? And you see what other people are going through, and you base your decisions off of what you observe, right? And so the more that you can see, the more that you know, right? It's kind of the same aspect of if you want to kind of frame this theory completely, think about how much you can see driving in a car on the road versus how much you can see in an airplane. Okay. Right. So on the car on the road, you can only see a certain amount of space in front of you, to each side of you, all that. In an airplane, you can see everything. And right. And he saw the market and the price theory like a sense of sight amplified, in the sense of prices are going to give you the baked in information about what that person that you don't know on the other side of the world is going through and what it took for them to make that product.
Wow. Okay. So he basically saw it as a sort of a passive form of communication is what it sounds like.
Correct. And when you, and this is the beautiful part about his work, is when you take his theories and you marry it to his other work, it makes total sense. So when you're arguing against central planning, his whole thing, and we talked about conceit, he thought that the fatal conceit of intellectuals was to assume that they knew enough to plan for society. Right. And his whole foundation, his whole modus operandi was based on the fact that no one individual, despite how intelligent they are, is intelligent enough to know what everyone is going through at all times and to conceive the best exact action that person should do. He felt that the people dealing with these things are the best to handle their own situations, and that's that. And that prices are amazing because they're a direct reflection of communication regardless of situation.
Okay, so... So while most people would argue, so basically with in regards to the fatal conceit, that is essentially the crux of socialism or communism or any of those controlled economic models. Let's see. Shoot, I lost my train of thought. So essentially, it does always come down to, we know better than you, and we're going to decide what is best for you. So whereas most people, myself included, would argue that from a moral standpoint that is incorrect, because you're forcing someone to do or not do something that he argued that it's not just that it's morally incorrect, but these people are not smart enough in the first place.
Correct. Exactly right. He was making the argument that, and so if you read The Road to Serfdom, that book is basically, so I call it the socialist slide, right? And to me, that kind of breaks it down to make it a little easier for people to understand his concept when he wrote The Road to Serfdom, was to say that, right, it's doesn't matter if you're right or you're left. The minute that you use government as an apparatus to do what government does, you're a socialist. He starts his book by saying this book is dedicated to socialists of all parties, which in my opinion is fucking brilliant, because he's basically saying like, you're all socialists.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, yeah, the first word I would come to, although I totally agree with that premise as well. The first thing I thought of was authoritarianism, because we talk a lot on our podcast, and I know we've talked in our circles about how it doesn't matter which side it is. As you said, it could be, in America, it could be the Republicans or the Democrats. If you're calling for more big government, you're calling for more big government. Authoritarianism is authoritarianism. So he's kind of saying the same thing, but using socialism instead of authoritarianism. That's
correct. And he's absolutely right when you think about it, because
oh yeah,
it is authoritarianism. Obviously, how else is socialism gonna meet its ends? Unless you're talking about libertarian socialists, which is a completely different topic.
Well, we did talk about that earlier off when we weren't recording, and just kind of not necessarily being baffled, but like, what would that look like?
Okay, so to the defense of the LibSocs, it has existed, and I can say confidently that my way of thought hasn't existed on the scale that LibSoc has. There's not been a lot of anarcho-capitalist examples in the world. There has been one that I can confidently say was very close to anarcho-capitalism. If you had people that were more educated in the space, they would say that there's actually a handful. I think there's Ireland, other stuff. I think ancient Iceland is a really good example. But yeah, there are working models of it. To bring it back to the topic at hand, Hayek actually pretty much, he didn't hate on socialism. He just basically said, so Hayek was all about human evolution. And his whole premise was that socialism worked for what it needed to do, which was bring people from being uncivilized, unintelligent, to being civilized and intelligent by working together within their community. His whole point, now, if you frame it with his theory of the sense of sight, kind of when you pose it like that, basically the way he was saying is socialism was great in getting us where we needed to get, but now it's dated and now it doesn't work. So it was great to get us from being an uncivilized culture to being a civilized culture, but it's not a permanent solution because it's not scalable.
There's a thought that I have where I want to double back on a little bit of what you were saying in terms of the conceit.
The fatal conceit.
Is that the terminology?
Mm-hmm.
Fatal conceit. Okay. The interesting thing that strikes me with that is, if you were to talk to anyone, I think, in America and say, do you think that there's someone out there that can perfectly determine what is good and correct for your life in all situations? I think anyone would say absolutely not, because they have enough pride in their own life and their understanding that they feel like that they wouldn't want to be controlled in that way. But the reality of the choices they make in politics is completely opposite for some people, in that thinking that they do submit authority to other entities, whether it's government or media or whatever, that they give over the power of free thinking to.
No,
That's just really striking to me.
I mean, you're absolutely right, and that's why he called it the fatal conceit. And this is the brilliance of Hayek, is he complimented them as he took them down a peg, right? He's basically saying you're so intelligent that it is your Achilles heel. You are so intelligent that you think you're intelligent enough to be the kind of intelligent that no human being is capable of, and that is your fatal conceit.
So essentially saying that, recognizing their potential or recognizing their capacity for very highbrow, high level thinking, for doing a lot of good things, but getting wrapped up in that, they end up doing bad things, or at least things that are antithetical to liberty.
Right. They have too much pride in their own intelligence.
That's brilliant. That's freaking brilliant.
Oh, he was the best. He was the best.
I really appreciate, from what little I know so far from our discussions, Vinny, I very much appreciate how practical it seems like all of his ideas are. It almost seems like one of those things where you want to, face palm or, smack your forehead and go, why didn't I think of that? It's brilliant in its simplicity, but at the same time, it seems like he was able to think of things in such a way that most people don't usually think about them naturally. But then he kind of packages it all together, and you look at it and you're going, wow, that's really simple. It's very practical. It's extremely logical, and I just really love that.
Yeah, absolutely. So he was certainly okay. So I do want to point out, a lot of times, and especially right now in current politics, especially in the Libertarian Party, there's this divide between, or people will talk about a divide between the pragmatists and the radicals. And when people talk about this, they talk about it in a way that kind of assumes that a pragmatist is boring. A pragmatist is going to agree with whatever you want to agree with, and they're going to do with whatever's easiest to do as far as a populist goes, and the radical is going to push different ideas. And that's not the case. If you examine the definition of what pragmatism is, and if you examine the definition of what a radical is, right, you can be a radical and be a pragmatist. A pragmatist is basically one that takes all of the given information that they have and applies it to a situation without pre-assuming anything, right? So you're basically going to say, I know nothing, but I'm willing to learn and I'm willing to adapt. So I'm going to take all of this. I'm going to throw all of my knowledge about what I think the world might be out the window, and I'm going to look at this situation for what it is, isolated with all of the data and information that I have available, and I'll use that to make my judgment call. That's a pragmatic approach. It doesn't mean being lame and making compromises to the populace. It means a logical, rational approach to a very real situation that's in front of you, making the best of the information that you have available, questioning everything all along the way.
Critical thinking.
Correct.
I think to add further weight and authority to that statement is a pragmatist, once they figure out efficiency and whether or not it is feasible to them, once they figure that out, that is truth. And that says a lot about the way that a true pragmatist would go forward, is once they find all those models out, that to them is truth, and that is how things should be conducted.
Right, and if they're doing it in the way that we're describing, it's very logical. They're kind of clearing the table and rebuilding using facts and statistics and empirical evidence. Then the conclusion that they come to, if they've done everything right, is objective truth.
Kind of. So we're close to it, but it's a little different, right? And so, are you familiar with the term epistemology? Epistemology is kind of hand in hand with pragmatism, and so that in a sense it respects objective truths, quote unquote. Putting my hands in the air for that, because one of the calling cards of the epistemological approaches is they theorize about the nature of knowledge itself, and that's where you get the idea.
Okay.
What, like I said, always questioning everything. So while there is an understanding, objective truth, sorry. So let's take something that's like a hardline stance that a lot of people don't change, and forgive me for the awkward topic, but like let's say like pedophilia. No one's going to change their mind about that, right? Like people in your surrounding community have.
And I certainly hope not.
Right. Well, right. And so people in your community have an opinion on that, and that's just their opinion on that. It's not a political opinion. It's not a religious opinion. That's a moral opinion. So that is to say that while you are always questioning everything, you're not going to say, but what about this one thing that I can honestly say that no one is okay for, right? And so it's weird. It's a mixture, right? It's not saying, okay, this is an objective fact. I know it. It's concrete. I'm going to go with it, because to be kind of epistemological, you question everything. But that is to say at the same time, if there seems to be something that is an objective truth, you accept it, you move on, and you include that into your data. If that makes sense.
Okay. Absolutely. Yeah, it really does. Again, the practicality of it is just blowing my mind right now.
Well, something that I'm looking at is, I guess it's a Venn diagram, or an overlap of knowledge, truth, and belief in terms of that. And that resonates with me, because knowledge is just acquiring details of a certain ideology or a thing. So you can have knowledge of what you believe, and you can have knowledge of the truth, and they can overlap, because someone can believe in the truth or they can believe in a lie. But ultimately, all of it is knowledge. So what you're saying, that totally makes sense to me.
Yeah. Good. Perfect. Yeah. It's
Wow.
yeah, and that's the crazy cool part about Hayek that I love. And don't get me wrong, like I love Rothbard. When people ask me who my prime influences are, I call myself like a Hayekian Rothbard lover. I love Rothbard. Love Rothbard. But there's something about Hayek that I've never read before in anybody else, and it's that open-mindedness to be wrong. It's the ability to question things. You've read Rothbard, Will, and so you know this. He was very matter-of-fact, and he wasn't going to change his mind. He had done his research, and he was incredibly well-educated and intelligent. And he didn't have any reason to change his opinions. And you can read that in his work, very much the opposite of Hayek. There was sentences he started by saying, I could very well be wrong one day. For instance, he had a multi-volume work that he did about law. Like, so basically Keynes asked him, okay, great. The road to serfdom. Awesome. Government always gets bigger. So what are you, an anarchist? Where do you draw the line? So he released an actually multi-volume book as a response. He never, so this is kind of cute. It's funny. He never responded directly to Keynes, ever. So Keynes basically challenged him constantly in debate. And Hayek, instead of addressing Keynes directly, would just express free market principles. And when it is awesome. Great. And so but the best part is no one knew Keynes's philosophy better than Hayek at the time, because they were big time enemies in the field of ideas. But Hayek never engaged him directly in a debate as far as refuting his points. And this is what I love about Hayek. He was so savage. When asked about it, he said, well, this gentleman, speaking of Keynes, and he always heaped a bunch of praise on him. He said, this guy is smart. He's quippy, right? And so he's going to get me if I slip. But more importantly, is his opinions change every time I talk to him. So I'm not going to sit there and have a conversation with someone who I don't even understand what they believe in.
Wow. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Good grief. Yeah. So he's got the quips, he's got the wit, and then on the side he'll go to the trouble of writing a multi-volume book series just to prove you wrong, or at least to show his side of things. That is a level of dedication that I aspire to. That is inspiring.
Right. Well, it's like, you know what? I could prove you wrong, but instead I'm just going to do super important work, and you can read it if you have any questions.
I love it. That's amazing.
Yeah. And
Good grief.
but to finish my point there is in that volume, to show the kind of mind that he was in that volume of work, he started out by basically saying that like we absolutely need to have a monopoly on lands controlled by the state if we want to have any kind of order. And he ended the book by saying common law could work actually. That's just kind of his mind, right? Is he unpacked logic and you could read him changing his mind as he wrote to you.
Wow.
Well, it certainly doesn't sound like a false sense of modesty. It's having the knowledge to be open-minded and say, I'm going to assert this belief, but I'm willing to hear the other side of the coin. And if you have logic to what you're saying, yeah, I'll consider it and I'll rework what I'm thinking and probably write 12 volumes of literature concerning the topic.
Right. Exactly right. Yeah, go ahead.
That's just kind of that. I think that's kind of something that we could all learn from, just that mindset in general. I mean, obviously, I've done a couple of episodes on things like critical thinking and all and the like, but especially nowadays in our extremely polarized political environment around the world, I think we could use a lot more of that. Everyone just being open to an exchange of ideas. Open to having their mind changed or changing someone else's mind. I wanted to put a little bit of extra emphasis on that just because, man, I mean, that's something that we can all learn from, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, so I'm going to stray from the beaten path here a little bit and talk about something. I was in a group. I brought this up a bit on our, by the way, I do have a podcast called a Think Liberty podcast if anyone wants to listen to it. It's on the same network, so you probably heard it, so I don't waste my breath. But we had an episode where we interviewed Larry Sharp, and I talked about this. I was in a group. It's a debate group. Anarcho-capitalism versus minarchism debate group for anyone that might be interested. It's run by Kyle Wagner. He's a good guy. I might talk, but I like Kyle. But one guy was in there, and he was an objectivist. And if you're not familiar, objectivism is basically Ayn Rand's whole thing. And he got his ass handed to him by someone who was a better objectivist than him. He came out trying to be super knowledgeable and super learned on something, and he got schooled. He got taken to school. And what I witnessed was beautiful. He said to the group, in front of God and everyone on this public forum, I'm humbled. I am bested. You have shown me that I have more to learn. I'm going to go back. I'm going to lick my wounds. I'm going to learn. I'm going to read some more. I'm going to come back and I'm going to be better at this. And tons of people gave him and I was like,
Why?
You guys need to knock it
That's
off. Like, this is
infuriating.
terrible. You cannot shame someone when they are being humble. Horrible.
Oh, yeah.
Because all it does is perpetuate the most ridiculous part of political discourse, which is the I can't be wrong even if I know I'm wrong.
Yeah. Oh, that makes me. That's really sad. That makes me a little upset to hear that. Because I mean,
Right?
as you were saying that, I was just impressed that somebody, online for Pete's sake, would be that open and kind of make themselves vulnerable and humbled in front of everyone. And then for them to just on him, that's awful.
Well, I mean, for me, it was like ascending to a mountaintop, and then the last thing you said, it suddenly flips to we're actually on a roller coaster and we're headed down the hill. Like, that is not at all what I expected. That's
like the end of
completely
the Mist,
disappointing.
when you think everyone's going to get rescued, and then they all just kill themselves, and then the army rolls in 2 minutes later. Like a 20-year spoiler
Right.
alert.
Oh, God, that movie. Yeah, right.
But man, that's terrible. Shoot, I'm just kind of really depressed.
Right.
Well, and
we can. And to bring
learn
it all
from
back
that,
around, that's something in Hayek's work that was never there, is that kind of sentiment of beating someone down because they're wrong. That's not to say. So what's amazing, if you ever have time, go pick up The Fatal Conceit. And he hands Ayn Rand her ass. He hands Albert Einstein his ass. Oscar Wilde, he hands him his ass. Like, it's something to behold. You just got to check it out. There's not a lot of people that can just make quick work of Einstein.
Wow. So
yeah,
I would definitely agree with
I want to ask you to flesh out the road to serfdom a bit more. So you touched
sir.
on a couple of the main themes in the book. In particular interest to me, at least, is you touched on the idea that government is going to inevitably grow. What were his thoughts on that?
So, I mean, it's tough to unpack it all really quickly, but as best I can do it is, so there is, well, I'm thinking before I say it. So there is a, if you're in libertarian circles, there's a popular thing that you'll kind of do when you argue with people. It's when you'll argue with a statist, quote unquote, a lot of times people, when they're not familiar with the principles of liberty, it's kind of default to say that, oh, well, okay. So for instance, you ask someone, how do you solve this problem? And a person's response will be, well, so you raise taxes to get money, because you always have to think of how to get money for it. And so the first response can be you raise taxes, or you make an incentive by tax cuts, or you do. So it always, whatever their suggestion is usually something that starts with governmental action. Right. And Hayek's entire premise in The Road to Serfdom was the idea that way of thinking is what leads to more government action. Right. And so it's essentially the role of the government is to find a way to cure manipulation with manipulation, and it's always going to only lead to greater manipulation.
Wow. Tom, I think we have a close friend.
That's the core thesis.
I think we have a close friend that we were recording with earlier today that needs to get that premise, and that's something that I definitely want to unpack with him later. The latest addition to our team.
Yeah, we'll double back and reconsult with Winston and present the idea.
Poor Winston. I don't know if he knows what he's getting into, but God love him. Okay, so I've touched on that before. I'm going to toot my own horn a little bit here again. In one of my previous podcast episodes on Liberty Bites, basically talking about how what you were saying, this attitude of there's a problem, we need to have it addressed. What's the first thing we're going to do? We're going to ask the government to do something about it. And, I rant and rave on that and always look for an alternative, and government involvement should always be the last resort, all of that sort of thing. But it sounds like, Hayek was a few decades ahead of me, and I'm sure he explained it way better.
He, well, I mean, to be fair, he explained everything better than anybody, right? Like he was insane. And you brought it up in the very beginning, is that he brought stuff up in a way that was so simple that it just kind of blows your mind apart, because he introduced these gigantic concepts in a really easy to understand way. I'll liken that to someone I'm also very appreciative of for their work, which is Milton Friedman. And so while he is a Chicago style monetarist, which I don't agree with, Milton Friedman was quite possibly one of the most gifted individuals with communicating free market ideas in a way that people can understand.
Yes, absolutely.
From what I know about price ceilings and floors and related to minimum wage is completely from him and the essays and amount of written word that he had on the subject. I really, really enjoy the way that he lays things out and explains it.
It's incredible. I mean, you can go. Okay. So if you're listening to this, please, I beg you, go on YouTube and look up Milton Friedman debates at college, and you'll get these videos of Milton Friedman debating with socialists at college campuses, and it's the best. But it's amazing because not only is he absolutely brilliant, even though I don't agree with him on everything, the dude was a genius, and he just crafted the way that he spoke in a way that was just so easy to understand so quickly and so simply. He can't be touched. And just on that was a skill in and of itself that people don't appreciate. So interesting to note, we're talking about Hayek. Hayek, after he spent so much time in Vienna, a lot of the Ludwig von Mises Institute moved away from where they were in Europe. Hayek was the last one to do so. When he did, he went to Chicago. And imagine being at the school he was at, because it was not only Hayek that ended up being a professor there, but he taught alongside Milton Friedman for quite some time. And that's actually why Friedman ended up writing the foreword to his updated version of The Road to Serfdom.
That's the version that I bought, courtesy of our conversation earlier this week. I'm really looking forward to diving into that.
Oh, it's I tell you what, man, you're in for a treat. I tell people all the time. I personally believe The Road to Serfdom should be one of the first things that people read when they get into the liberty movement. If they're at all interested in liberty, they should read The Road to Serfdom, because so we'll break into a different concept here, if that's okay with you. Can I traverse a little bit?
Oh, please do.
Okay, so I don't know how long these are supposed to be, but I love this, so I'm not going to let you stop. So I'm having a great
That's
time.
all right. Well, for the record, you just do as long as you want to go, and we'll just split it up into 45-minute episodes in post, and that way, if people want to listen to them consecutively, they can. But if they just want to get it in 45-minute chunks, that's fine too. But yeah, you just do your due, man. I'm having a great time.
Yeah, me too. You get some drinks in me and start talking to me about Hayek, and there's no stopping. So this is an important thing to me, and this is something, Will, that you and I have talked about at some time, and I'm really excited to bring this up right now. And that's the idea of anarchy being possible in a society. And
Yes.
So I urge everyone within earshot to go on their computer and type into that little Google search bar Hayekian anarchist. So this is a thing. This is a big, huge thing. Now, it is important to note, Hayek was not an anarchist, period. Mm-hmm. He was not. Mm-hmm. Okay. Hayek, he advocated for all kinds of state. Right. But the important thing to note is that when you think about Hayek and you think about his work, again, I'm gonna echo this. He was always stressing the importance of human evolution. He was always stressing the importance of a spontaneous order. So for me, as someone who is also a pragmatist and who is also questioning everything at all times and never believing that I have found any objective truth that will last for all eternity, and that every situation is a situation that needs to be dissected with knowledge and understanding available to me as I have it, I look at it as Hayek obviously clearly thought that the next step in human evolution was to establish a stateless society, and I am not alone in thinking that. But here's the important thing. When we talk about definitions and we talk about anarchy, I think a lot of people, a lot of times, have this idea that anarchy is some chaotic, lawless, moralist thing. And I think it's important to understand that if you go right now and you type into Google anarchy, Merriam-Webster will pop up and it will give you 10 different definitions of anarchy. And even about 3 scrolls down, it's going to tell you that anarchy is one of the most kind of contentious definitions because it has so many different meanings to so many different people. So when I think of anarchy, I don't think of Mad Max. I think of a lack of a central body of authority with a monopoly on violence and rule of law. Right. And so
there's a lot to unpack there.
It is. And so it doesn't necessarily mean there are no rules. It means there are no rulers. Right. And so when people say, and this is an often thing, oh, anarchy leads to feudalism. No, you're wrong. Because my definition of anarchy states there are no rulers. So it couldn't be feudalism. Right. So first of all, feudalism needs a crown to be feudalism. Am I wrong?
You're not wrong.
Right. So you're way out already in saying that anarchy can be rid of feudalism because you need a crown. What I believe in doesn't require a crown. What I believe in just requires that there is no central authority with a monopoly on violence and rule of law. So when you look at anarcho-capitalism, for instance, which is a term that was coined by Rothbard, I don't look at it as anarchy first, and it has to adhere to all these definitions and understandings of anarchy as people see it. I look at it as a root, a prefix to a bigger term, right? And so Marx himself, everyone's best friend, Karl, for the good of the people, Marx, old Uncle Carl, this diseased alcoholic piece of
Don't pull any punches there, Vinny.
I can't stand it, bro. The guy was an alcoholic. He spent most of his life like grumpy and diseased, and everyone wants to bow down at the altar of some dude who's just perpetually drunk and in a bad mood. Like, get the
and surfing on his buddy's couch, right?
Right. Like, oh, Angles, I need rent. Like, get out of here. And so I don't care. It's communism.
He's not wrong, though. He's not wrong. It's a toxic ideology just across the board.
It's totally toxic. Go ahead.
Well, just because he was that way doesn't necessarily mean that his ideology was bad. I just want to lay that out for anyone listening. His ideology is bad on its own merits.
No,
that's a very valid point.
Yeah. No, you're right.
All
You're right.
I
just hate communism. Right. And so I'm obviously going to take my pot shots, but you are right. And so if we're remaining intellectually honest, you are correct.
Okay.
Communists aren't real people anyway, so it's fine.
That's true. Also true. So, but my point in mentioning him is that, so even Marx, who, Marx was not an anarchist. He called his version of the market an anarchist market. And so I bring up Marx. Yeah. And so if you read Das Kapital, he brings it up as an anarchist market because it's anarchistic in nature. And that's kind of what I'm trying to highlight here is that the term anarchy, like just because you put it and pepper it on something doesn't mean it has to be anarchy as everyone thinks it means. His whole idea, Marx's, of putting anarchy into his idea of I say market with quotes because obviously Marx was very anti market in the sense that we know it. He called it anarchistic because even though there were regulations that he was suggesting and things that, you can't do, he called it anarchistic because he felt it was the natural nature of things. And so when you're analyzing Rothbard, when I bring it all back around, when you're analyzing Rothbard and you're analyzing anarcho-capitalism, you have to understand it's a prefix. It's not being used to say this is anarchy. It's anarcho-capitalism. It's a prefix, just like Marx said it's an anarchy-driven market. Rothbard was doing the same thing and saying it's anarcho-capitalism to say that there is a lack of central authority and monopoly on violence and rule of law, but that is not to say there is no order, which parlays perfectly into Hayek beating the drum constantly of a spontaneous order. And so you kind of see this concept I'm trying to unpack, which is to say that it's not anarchy as in, like I said, Mad Max, no rules. It's anarchistic in nature, which is why it's used as a prefix. So I would more quickly call myself a Hayekian anarchist than I would an ANCAP, but that makes no sense to anybody. So,
well, once you explain it, it makes a whole lot more sense. And, at least on my part, the more I talk to people like you, Vinny, and you express your beliefs and explain everything the way you do, the more I am open to the idea of something like anarcho-capitalism. I'll admit freely before I started talking to you, when someone said, "Oh, I'm an ANCAP," I was thinking like Mad Max or Escape from New York kind of thing.
Oh, because a lot of them are terrible. They're just the worst. I mean, I will not lie to you when I say that I am surrounded by some horrible company ideologically.
So are you an exception rather than a rule when it comes to anarcho-capitalism?
I would never pat myself on the back that much. I would just say that it's so let me take the Hayek approach and try to be as humble as I can when saying it's a very complex construct. It's a foundation. Like if I were to explain what I am, it's that I believe that you can lay a pathway for water and then let water do what water does, which is go wherever it's free to go. But that doesn't mean that you can't lay a foundation first to make sure that you avoid dangers and pitfalls. So it's just like Hayek's kind of approach of a spontaneous order. It's not just spontaneous, it's a spontaneous order. People need order. I'm not recognizing the fact that there is a need for rules, there is a need for adherence to rules, and there is a need for people to be able to be confident in the fact that their life, liberty, and property is protected. But I don't think that there needs to be a central monopoly on violence to achieve those things, if that makes sense.
It does. It absolutely does. So something that I wanted to get into a little bit more was you were talking about how Hayek saw the economy as a form of communication for people around the world. As that pertains to liberty, one of the main concepts that I've kind of latched onto within anarcho-capitalist theory is the idea that in an ANCAP society, or at least in the market, that is ultimate liberty. You know, everyone is free to decide what they want to buy, what they don't want to buy, what the value of that the item or consumable is, the product is that worth it to them? What I guess I'm trying to tie all of these different concepts together. Is there? I'm sure you could explain it better than I could. What do you think about that?
Well, unpack that a little bit more for me. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be.
No, not at all. So
I want to make sure I give you the best answer I can.
No, I appreciate that. It's a bit disjointed on my end anyway. I've got all these different things rolling around in my head. So Hayek was talking about the idea that economics is a reflection of people's values, or at least what values they place on certain things. It tells you what they need or what they want, all of these different ways to communicate. So at the same time, the idea of anarcho-capitalism also lends credence to the argument that that is ultimate liberty in the market. You know, everyone, if you don't have any sort of centralized or planned economy, there's no regulations in the market from a government. That is ultimate liberty. So how would let's see? I was grasping onto it.
I'm picking it up.
Okay.
No, I'm picking up what you're putting down. So yeah, okay. So first and foremost, I'd like to say that my correlation between the idea of quote unquote anarchy and Hayek's work is of my own, and I again promote anyone to please look up Hayekian anarchy. It's been studied by universities. This is not a new concept, but I will take that responsibility because all throughout Hayek's work, he stressed the importance of the state.
Okay.
Right. So I'm not going to try and paint this as something that it's not. It's just so with Hayek. Okay, you're familiar with Rothbard, yes. Correct, Will?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in his work he did about the Great Depression, Rothbard made a statement along the lines of if the government puts a regulation on the market that restricts government manipulation of the market, it's still a free market, regardless of the fact that there was regulation. Do you remember?
Oh, yeah.
Something along those lines?
I equated that essentially to how when we formed, when the Constitution was ratified, it was basically putting into place restrictions against the government by the government before it was even the government was really fleshed out into what it became, a couple of decades later or what have you. So in the same way, that's kind of what I compared it to from an economic standpoint rather than a purely political one.
Right, exactly. So with Hayek, his whole thing was, obviously, right? Like if I were to call Hayek anything, I would call him a classical liberal. In that sense, he absolutely believed in the protection of life, liberty, and property. He believed that the state should be in charge of protecting those things. And with all that said, though, if you read his work, all of the restrictions or all of the state that he ever advocated was for the market to keep it ethical and free. Right. And so when you take into consideration the fact that he thought that prices, so I sent you a video the other day, and the video was about kind of trying to describe Hayek's price model theory to someone who isn't as familiar with this, philosophical work of all these brilliant minds that we talk about, like Rothbard and Mises and everything. So if someone in Colombia is making coffee and there is a hurricane in their village and it's harder for them to make coffee, then the price of that coffee is going to go up. Jane at a supermarket does not know that there was a hurricane, or she might not know that there was someone's going to say like, there can't be hurricanes here. I don't know. But either way, she's not going to know about the situation that's going on there that made that price rise. She's just going to make a decision based on the prices. And that's kind of that's the axiom. We'll go back to that. That's the whole core of his belief, is to say that there is communication about circumstances and problem solving there. And we're going to tie that back into central planning. You don't need someone to tell you how to do these things, because these things are being communicated through the price. And when you manipulate the price through tariffs, through taxes, through manipulation, through any kind of government intervention, you are basically muting that communication from this group of people to that group of people. So like if you see me online all the time, you'll see me arguing about muted market signals, and that's a triggering topic to me, because a muted market signal is the first step toward a centrally planned economy. And that's the egregious act, in my opinion and in Hayek's opinion, of the centrally planned economy, is that when you mute market signals, you're taking away that information.
You know, sorry, go ahead.
And that's go ahead.
Oh.
No, you're all good. I've been drinking, obviously.
Dude,
so
I'm loving it, man. This is great. I wanted to just say that I'm noticing more and more parallels the more I look into this between economics and politics, and obviously the two are inseparably linked. But at the same time, especially when you're looking at it from this perspective, with economics as a form of communication, and the government manipulating that communication with the level of regulation that they put on the market. I was reminded of a conversation I had with a good buddy of mine, and he was talking about tariffs and sort of a protectionist mentality as far as the U.S. government is concerned moving forward. And we were talking about the price of vehicles, the price of gas, all of these different things. And I made the point. Basically, he was coming from the standpoint that it's good for the government to do this at certain times, and even if it's not necessarily good, it's a necessity, in one way or another. And I made the point, that you've got all of these sort of underlying regulations that people don't even think about. We have 20 cents a gallon tax on gas, and I think that's just at the federal level. That's not even looking at the state level, and obviously that varies greatly. With the price of cars, if you're importing a vehicle from a foreign country, what sort of modifications do you have to make for the environmental laws in the U.S., or how much did it cost to buy all of the parts for that? What about import tariffs? All of these different things, and how much of that could be gotten rid of if you just took away those regulations that our own government is putting on them. And I guess I'm rambling a little bit at this point, but there's so many different ways that the government already regulates or intrudes on that form of communication, as you were talking about, that people just don't even realize. And even if they do realize it, they just kind of accept it. So it's mind-blowing to think about the potential that the market could have if the free market was truly unleashed, as it were.
So this is, and you're not babbling. I think this is a very cohesive stream of thought. And I'm going to use this to parlay. So something, if you know me at all, you know that I talk about cryptocurrencies all the time. Okay. And so this is interesting to me. So we're talking about Hayek, we're talking about his influence. And so one of the things that I appreciate the most about Hayek is, so we go back to how he started his book. This book is dedicated to the socialists of all parties. So let's get about that in retrospect. Back then, in the 30s, it was something. When you think about it now, that's insane, because he was absolutely right. Right. And that's mind blowing in the sense of that something could write. Sorry, I've been drinking. Someone could write something so long ago that still makes so much sense today. And if you look at the sales of the Road to Serfdom on like Google, and you look at it all, and you'll see that they surged throughout the years. And it's because he was right. Right. He came out and he said this stuff, and it doesn't matter how old it is, he was still right. And you can look at different works from different people, and they become dated. And I will point specifically to our liberty-minded friends on the left. and a lot of libsoc stuff and anarcho-communist stuff that we talk about. And it's like I said before with Hayek saying it was a stepping point, and as it was, right? Because you can't have like factory production with anarcho-communism, right? There's like you're not going to have like fully automated like gay space communism. It's not going to happen. Right. And don't tell me you've never heard of this before. See, Will has. I can tell a laugh. He's heard this before. Right,
fully automated. It's very important.
Fully automated gay space communism.
Gay space communism.
Well, it's late stage. No,
what would be? Never mind.
Well,
I almost said what would be
late
automated,
stage capitalism.
I genuinely don't want to know.
No, this look. As ridiculous as it sounds, it is following Marx to his logical conclusion, because he says in late stage capitalism there will come a time where technology will surpass the power of the individual in a capitalist sense. Capitalism will fall, and it will become a life ruled by machines. And capitalism does nothing but degrade the human everything. Right, and so that's why they say fully automated, because Marx pretty much envisioned a society where computers or technology does all the work for us, and it's fully automated gay space capitalism or communism. Sorry,
I miss the homosexual.
Well, it's because it's just because it's Marxism. I mean that one is just because it's Marxism, and there are no morals, and nothing is objective. And like, who cares? So it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing, but
obviously it's hyperbolic, but it's basically just a running joke in liberty or libertarian circles.
Okay.
It's just kind of a community inside joke, I guess.
Right, and I mean. The drinking now, I'm kind of forgetting the tangent that I've been going off on, but the whole idea is that like that whole thing presupposes a whole bunch is going to happen that hasn't happened, and I don't even know where I started with that, to be honest. That's the whole point of the exercise here, man. This is why we really love doing this particular show.
Just the further you get into it, the more just disjointed but more fun it gets. At least for us. I mean, we'll see how the audience responds to it.
Right. Well, the thing that's hard for me is I completely forgot where I started, because the minute that we got onto fully automated gay communism, all I could think about was fully automated space gay communism.
Yeah, everything just kind of came to a screeching halt.
I'll be honest, I was tracking with it as well, and you said that, and I went,
it's a thing. I wish it weren't. But
okay, so you were talking about our liberty-minded friends on the left.
Okay.
I think...
Go ahead.
Because now I've totally lost it in the mass of fully automated gay space communism. There's got to be an fully acronym for that. We got to work on that off mic. But so I think what you were trying to get at is that there's all these different schools of thought and views in the liberty movement. You know, even with things that a lot of us would roll our eyes at, like libsocs. Or, anarcho-communism, or all of these different things. But while they're all worth exploring, we need to be able to differentiate between, like, okay, we know this works, we know this doesn't. Kind of that whole theme of critical thinking, of questioning everything. But once we figure out what works, we know it works. And I believe you were talking about how Hayek kind of came up with these timeless ideas, these timeless fundamentals. Okay.
Yes. His ability to forecast. I was talking about cryptocurrency. So his ability to see the future for what it was, because he was just so right about the logic that he was unpacking.
Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, you got me back on track. Congratulations. It's hard to do. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So you read The Road to Serfdom and you walk away from it going, wow, he was absolutely right. Absolutely right. You read The Fatal Conceit and you walk away from it going, wow, he was absolutely right. There was another book he did called The Decentralization of Money. And he was also absolutely right there. You can look up, so if you look up on YouTube, for anyone listening, search Hayek price theory, and you will actually hear him in the late 1980s talking about what is the concept of cryptocurrency. And that's what is interesting to me, is basically what he said is people don't understand that the power that the government has on them, and this absolute power, is derived from the creation, the distribution, and the monopoly of the money supply. And the next step to human evolution was a free market of money. And that was a big, big thing for Hayek, is a free market for money, a free market for currency. Let there be an open market for currency. And that's exactly what cryptocurrency is. And so that's why I'm so big on cryptocurrency. It's not because I love making money, which I do. I'm a good capitalist. Don't get me wrong. Right? Like I spend a ton of my time being as good a capitalist as I can. You can go to think-liberty.com/shop. You can see the shirts design. I will sell them to you gladly. And I love being a capitalist.
For American dollars or your cryptocurrency of choice. Correct?
Well, it's only American dollars right now because we do it through a platform. But the point is,
I gotcha.
Sure. The point is that he did notice that the next step for us as a civilization was to create a free market for money, and that's exactly
incredible.
what cryptocurrency is, and that's why I embrace it as much as I do. Because yes, exactly right. It's a free market for money. It's a free market for currency, and it's not just about gains, and it's not just about trading. It's about having the freedom to decide this currency is worth more to me than that currency, and that's huge. That changes the game.
Well, that's price communication. That doubles back on his own point that people are signaling sort of another level of communication.
Correct.
But it
Absolutely
just happens
correct.
to be with what they value with cryptocurrency.
Correct. And to his point, when you tie it all in with his disdain for central planning, it makes total logical sense. It's just insane to imagine the fact that in 1980, some dude was talking about the concept of cryptocurrency before anyone even knew what the hell a blockchain was.
I still don't know what the hell a blockchain is. So he has that going for him.
Well, to give you the very brief understanding of the blockchain, the most important thing about a blockchain is it allows something to be decentralized, right? And so basically what it is it's an open ledger on the internet that just has information. It's super, super simple. So the Bitcoin blockchain, we'll talk about Bitcoin because that's like the big important one. I won't stay on this forever. Basically all it is it's an open ledger of transactions. That's it.
Wow.
That's it. It's not some amazing, miraculous thing that solves all the world's problems on the surface. All it is an open ledger of transactions. So basically, if Will went and paid $10 for something at Walmart and he did it with Bitcoin, that $10 goes onto the blockchain, and that is viewable by everyone and everything. Now, they don't know that it was Will. They just know that it came from this wallet address and it paid for this thing, and that's that. And no one can change it, and it's there, and no one manages it, and it's all handled by computers that are mining. So it's decentralized. There's no one body in charge of it. And that's the amazing part. The amazing part is that by someone mining it, it's made decentralized, and as a counterproduct of it being, or not counterproduct, but a byproduct of it being mined, you get a token from it that is used as currency. So look at it like digital gold. So people always say that like, oh, well, it's not like gold because it's not backed. That's not true, because it's a proof of work concept, which means you have to actually take the computer, you have to mine it with hash, which is a whole different concept that we'll have to explain later if you ever wanted to learn about it. But you don't just get to make fake internet money, right? There's protocols that have to be followed. There's algorithms at work to where you have to generate this thing, but it's all decentralized. There's not like one Bitcoin computer. It's a network of people all using Bitcoin that make up the Bitcoin network, and that's how it's decentralized. And so when you think about that open ledger here are the aspects of blockchain: is it's immutable information. It's open source in the sense that anyone can contribute to it that has Bitcoin, and it's decentralized in that no one central body controls it. And then so take all of those aspects and then put some concept into it, such as IP laws, right? So copyright. how big a problem is copyright when you have an open ledger that tells all truths?
There's full transparency there. There's full accountability if it came down to it. But no one is being forced into it. That's just how it is. So you choose to partake in it or you don't.
Well, right. But let's say for the sake of IP, let's say that Will goes and makes Liberty Bites, and you're like, this is it. I made Liberty Bites, which is, by the way, anyone listening that doesn't know the name of a podcast, it is now on our Think Liberty network that you should be listening to every episode.
I appreciate the plug.
Absolutely. But so if you think of Liberty Bites and you think of the fact of copyright laws, so let's say that you get on the blockchain and this blockchain is made for IP, and you say, I am Will and I am going to submit Liberty Bites. This is a name I came up with and it's a name for my podcast. That's on the blockchain for God and everyone to see. Guess what? It's decentralized. You didn't have to get a license to do that. You didn't have to go and pay for that to happen. You didn't have to go and negotiate a lobbyist to get that privilege. It was just you had an idea, you put it on the blockchain. Now it is information that everyone can see. So when Joe Blow comes out and says that I'm going to piggyback off of your success, I'm going to name my project Liberty Bites, guess what exists? A blockchain that says you were not first, you are a copycat, you are a fraud. Wow. Didn't need a government.
So that is fully automated cyber anarcho-capitalism.
In a sense, it's decentralized information, which is something more valuable than I think people give the credit for.
Indeed. So let's start bringing this in, putting a nice little bow on it. What are the top 3 works by Hayek that the average listener absolutely has to read?
Sure. So I'll go off the beaten path a little bit in that one of these works isn't by Hayek himself. So the first thing that I think everyone should read is The Road to Serfdom. That is, one of his first works, one of his most popular works. I don't want to say one of his first. He did a bunch of economic stuff before that. That's totally important. But if you're not super into like really intense advanced economics, it's not gonna hook with you. So go with The Road to Serfdom first. After that, I would definitely suggest The Fatal Conceit. That's an amazing book. And, we talked about definitions here. He has a whole chapter in The Fatal Conceit dedicated to how people and their misunderstanding of definitions and their lack of ability to have advanced language understandings is a giant problem with communication. A great book. And the third that I would actually recommend is a biography called Hayek. It's written by Iman Butler, and it's a great book about Hayek and what he thought and kind of how he worked. It unpacks his opinions of social justice, which I think are amazing, and it does it all in a very easy to understand way. So, Road to Serfdom, Fatal Conceit, and a biography called Hayek by Iman Butler.
Outstanding. So I do want to ask you about his thoughts on social justice briefly, because I know you had mentioned it in our conversation a couple of days ago, and I just thought it was really interesting the approach he took from a philosophical standpoint on the idea of social justice. What can you tell us about that?
Sure. So I'll use it to segue into another point I made earlier about he was kind of this foreseer of truths in the future. And he was right because he talked about this stuff that just turned out to be totally on point. Social justice was one of those. Who would have thought in 1930 that IDPOL would become such an issue that it is now? Right. And so his opinion of social justice was more rooted in the fact of wealth redistribution. And basically the way he looked at it was that social justice is, for any of those familiar with the egoist Max Stirner, he essentially said social justice was a spook. It wasn't real. And he just rejected the notion of it completely. And his whole premise of doing so was based on the fact that society is not a person, and therefore society could not be guilty of any injustice. So the whole premise of social justice is a fallacy in that. And so the way he framed it was, let's say Scotty Dubins down the street is a total idiot.
Scotty, that douchebag.
And the dude is never right. Total douchebag. Hates Scotty. Right. Like it's like that Dane Cook stand up. Everyone hates Karen. And so he looked at it like, let's say Scotty made a bunch of money from inheritance and no one thinks it's fair because Scotty obviously has no marketable talents. Right. Hayek's whole point was, so what? That's not my fault. It's not Scotty's fault. It's not society's fault. There is no one to blame for the fact that Scotty's dad had a bunch of money and gave it to him. Right? The guy that made the pet rock, we can't control the fact that the pet rock made a bunch of money. Right. No, you're absolutely right. And so that's a great point to bring it modern, right? Like everyone thinks a fidget spinner is stupid, but at the end of the day, the fidget spinner made whoever created the fidget spinner a bunch of money. That's not injustice.
Granted, there is a special corner of hell reserved for whoever created the fidget spinner, the podcast, the Tide Pod meme, and Nickelback. But that is for God to decide, not us.
That's exactly right. Is it you can't his whole premise was the fact that you can't look at society and say, how dare you listen to Nickelback? Because it wasn't society's decision to decide to like Nickelback. It was the decision of individuals in their situations that decided, hey, we're going to like shit music.
So,
you know, and so.
I'm sorry, go ahead. So.
Go ahead.
No,
you go.
Well, Nickelback only has value because a large group of individuals, for some reason, made value or gave them value by way of their own individual decisions or decisions as individuals. Now I'm getting kind of drunk. Anyway,
reality is perception.
So basically, what he was saying was, so certainly with your example of inheritance, everyone says, well, that's not fair. Well, it's not a question of whether or not it's fair. It happens, let it be. So in the same way, in a bit more of a modern context, with these tidal waves of blue-haired land whales and all of the stereotypes that go along with social justice, it would be like someone from a quote unquote oppressed class coming at someone, let's say like a white dude, and saying, you're oppressing me or you're doing this or that. Because society has these patterns, he would say that that's entirely ridiculous, which obviously I agree with. But so basically for him, it sounds like it always comes down to the individual. So an individual is making a decision which might affect another individual, et cetera, personal responsibility and all of that kind of thing. It seems like those were the fundamental principles of his views of social justice. Essentially,
yes. I mean, the way he looked at it was that social justice was a fallacy because society is not a person, and that society could not ever be guilty of an injustice because it is not one body that enacted a certain injustice.
So he just kind of threw all of that out.
So it's yes. Yeah. He just threw it out the window. And hold on, I'm trying to find a quote here, and it's I tell you, I found it. So this is my favorite quote of all time. This is the quote that really kind of tied me to Hayek as understanding completely his point of view. We talk about anarchism. We talk about all this stuff. So this is a Hayek quote that just blew my mind apart. Liberty not only means that the individual has both the opportunity and the burden of choice. It also means that he must bear the consequences of his actions. Liberty and responsibility are inseparable. And that to me is the that helps understand the entire underlying core of his philosophy.
I know I've touched before on the Liberty Bites podcast about how liberty is inherently dangerous. for that exact reason. I mean, you have the liberty to make your own decisions, but you have to understand that there are consequences that go along with those decisions. The consequences could be good or bad, but obviously, it's far more poetic the way he kind of ties all that together. That's some really good stuff. I'm gonna have to dig into that.
Well, because the way he puts it is the opportunity and the burden. And you talk about and this is why it's so connected with ANCAP, in my opinion. This is why many Hayekians end up to be like kind of anarchists in a sense, is because he's telling you right here, the individual has both the opportunity and the burden, right? And so you're talking about a society based on contracts. Let's break it down. It's a society based on contracts. When there's no legal monopoly of violence and authority and all this, it's based on the decisions that you make with another person. So that means that not only do you have an opportunity to do whatever you feel free to do, but you have a burden of choice and responsibility. And that to me is just absolutely brilliant. It's just totally brilliant. Just pointing out the fact that, look, it's not all Mad Max. It's not all fun and games. It's a matter of you are the person responsible. So when he says that those that are the best equipped to handle the situations in their neighborhood, in their their culture, in their society, it's the people that are in that culture, in that society, in that neighborhood, and that absolutely puts the onus on those people on the outcomes of their situations. And to me, that just tells me that, this works with anarchy.
No, that absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
What I would say for anyone who is listening that would that's hearing this and is saying to themselves, I would like to give my authority to someone else because that is a burden that I can't bear. I think if you want to do that, this is America. You can absolutely find some organization that you can give your freedoms to.
That's not liberty-minded.
But don't force that ideology.
No, that's absolutely right.
Else. That's not how this works.
It's the whole point is that, and I'm glad you bring that up, because the whole point is that the individuals who are responsible for the outcomes of their situations should be those who direct those situations. So if they turn out to be socialists, if they turn out to be whatever they be, then that's best for them to decide how to handle their situations. And that's what's great about Hayek, is he gifted respect to people in that sense, to say that, look, I am not one to tell you how to handle your neighborhood, how to handle your society. That's for you to decide because you are the closest to it.
Man, well, that's there's a lot to consider in that, but I guess in as much as you can cover in the hour and a half that we've had, that's FA Hayek, economist, philosopher, absolute savage, and Vinny Marshall, FA Hayek fanboy. Vinny, hey, thanks for coming on, man. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, big time. Dude, I got to tell you, I haven't had this much fun in a long time. I've been sitting here drinking this monkey shoulder, and I'm just appreciating the ever loving hell out of it, and I can't thank you guys enough for being a part of the Think Liberty Network and for bringing us such great content. I can't thank you enough for hosting me on a podcast that I didn't have to host myself. This has been great. I'm not only glad to have you as a part of the network, but glad to be making inroads with new friends, talking about cool stuff that I really love talking about.
Tom, do you have any closing thoughts?
I just wanted to say I'm thankful for your words and your passion on the subject, and I'm glad to meet a new brother in liberty.
Yeah, absolutely. I and you know what? I'll probably make some enemies here when I say this, but I'm kind of like a classical liberal in practice and an anarchist in heart, because I know there's some hurdles we have to get over first. But if I could give anything to anybody listening to this, it's put down the whole like anarchist versus libertarian minarchist movement argument. And in the words of Murray Rothbard, we're on a liberty train. And you can get off that train whenever you want. I happen to think that the next step of human evolution is to live in a stateless society. And if you don't agree with me, you can just get off the liberty train.
You know what?
When you're good.
There's a lot of truth to that, certainly.
When you're good to go.
I
But I'll work with anybody. Like that. My whole point is to say that if we did a bunch of work and we got to just classical liberal, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I am okay with it. I'm happy with it. It's better than what we got now. That's right.
Well, shoot, man, it's been a really good time. We would love to have you on again. And for our audience, we hope you enjoyed this particular episode. And thanks for joining us to become more liberty-centered along with us.
And I will go out to say, just because I'm totally used to doing this for every one of our podcasts, you're listening to the Think Liberty Network. If you could do me a huge favor, anyone listening, please go to our iTunes, leave a review. Do your best to please listen to every episode you can of Liberty Bites. It's a great podcast. They're dropping knowledge bombs. And please do your best to help us spread the word of the Think Liberty Network. Every review you leave is huge. Every time you favorite us on Stitcher or on Podbean or whatever you listen to, it's huge. You're helping out Will. You're helping out me. You're helping out Think Liberty. You're helping out Liberty Bites. And you're helping out the Liberty movement as a whole. We thank you for listening, and we hope you listen again.